Hi, my name is Mark Davis. I'm an educational psychologist with Derbyshire Educational Psychology Service, and this is the next in our series of videos traversing the transition. As you can see, this one focuses on understanding behaviour. If you want to check out the other videos that we've got so far, they're on whole school recovery, trauma, thriving, emotionally based school non-attendance and kindness, and there will be others coming out too. So today's video, Understanding Behaviour, is using an approach that we use very often in our work called functional assessment. And the training that many of us have had, on which we base the approach that we've developed more within Derbyshire, the training was from the Institute for Applied Behavioural Analysis, IABA. So today's video won't be heavy on references. But when I'm talking about research and when I'm talking to you about the approach, it is based on work that they developed. And they've got a website, a nice simple web address, iaba.com, if you wanted to have a look at that. Okay, so when we work in schools and when there is behaviour that people are finding challenging and maybe difficult to move on with, this is the whole process that we might engage with the school and with parents and carers. First stage being identifying the behaviour in the first place and gathering information about the behaviour. The second stage is the one that I'm focusing on in this video, using that information to come to our best understanding of the behaviour. So using functional analysis or functional assessment. The purpose of that is then to help us to move forwards in the most helpful way. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I will reference it later on towards the end of the video today. And the final stage is, as very often in education, we need to be willing to review, to reevaluate, to reframe the understanding that we came to. So this approach, functional assessment, has some fundamental assumptions underpinning it in terms of the nature of behaviour and also how it's helpful to move forwards. So in terms of behaviour, we make an assumption that all behaviour serves a reasonable function for the person. Function may sound like a bit of jargon at this point. You could substitute the word purpose and it would more or less mean the same thing. So all behaviour has a reasonable purpose. And the reasonable word in there is important. The behaviour itself might not appear reasonable to us, but we say that the purpose of it is reasonable. Secondly, that behaviour can communicate something to us, so we can learn something about what is going on for an individual through their behaviour. And thirdly, that behaviour doesn't just spring up out of us regardless of what's going on around. It's entirely dependent on that mix of experience and interaction with the present environment. So all of that background stuff that's going on in a person's life, the stuff that's happened in the past, their experiences, and what's happening for them now in terms of their interaction with the environment. And so with this approach, we say that it's far more effective to address this using positive approaches that build on quality of life, that build skills, rather than maybe more punitive approaches, not that are harshly punitive, but approaches which are more about maybe squashing down or eliminating behaviour that we don't want. We focus more on positive approaches that help build up the child and help improve the situation for them so that they no longer rely on those behaviours that we perceive as negative. And we also say that it's more effective to use a variety of elements or components, or this is what the research suggests, both that positive approaches and having a range of different types of approach is going to have a better longer term outcome and be more effective. So I'm using the metaphor of an iceberg here, as you can see. And when I'm doing training on this topic, very often with school staff, we'd have a discussion at this point about what behaviour does challenge people, and trying to really elicit the sorts of things that will become difficult for us to manage. And when we're in this part of the training, what tends to come from the participants is things like behaviour that's physically harmful, whether that's to the child themselves, to others, or to the environment, damaging toys or equipment, that kind of thing. So physically harmful behaviour. Maybe behaviour that's not so much harmful, but is disruptive, prevents others teaching and learning. Maybe frequent shouting out at a high volume or something like that. Behaviours that are more around kind of non-engagement with the adult, not following instructions, not doing a task that's been set. And then behaviour that's quite different from that, that's not outwardly challenging in any way, but is withdrawn kind of behaviour. So again, it might be around non-engagement, it might be around not speaking to others, whether peers or adults. It might be simply taking themselves away from a situation, leaving the classroom, leaving the school. So we get a whole range of behaviours, and with the iceberg metaphor, these behaviours are the things that we can see, the things that are above the surface. And as you know, with the iceberg metaphor, we always say that there's a lot more beneath the surface than there is visible above the surface. So what we're really interested in here is what's going on underneath. Because if we stop at the level of the surface and we think, okay, so this child is demonstrating these behaviours that we're finding problematic, what do we do about that? What strategies have we got for a child who hits other children, or what strategies do we have for a child who shouts out while we're trying to address the class? And we're going to tend there to focus, as I said a few moments ago, very often on punitive strategies. Again, not necessarily harshly punitive, but strategies which are designed to squash those behaviours, to eliminate those behaviours. What we're interested in with functional assessment is what is going on beneath that surface. And so one way of thinking about this, the I statements. So what might the child be saying about their needs through their behaviour? Coming back to the idea that behaviour can communicate something to us. So we have I statements, or I messages. We sometimes use that phrase, will mean the same thing. And that is looking at it from the child's perspective. What might they say about what's going on for them if they could articulate it? So just as an example, here's a behaviour, a refusal to do a given task. So possible I messages, and there could be any number of I messages, but possible I messages might be things like, I can't do it, I'm bored, I need to be in control. Maybe it's not about I can't do it, or I don't like the task, or I don't find it stimulating, but it's about I just want to choose when I do it or how I do it. I'm scared of looking stupid, so maybe related to I can't do it, or at least I feel like I can't do it, and so we've got some avoidance of the task. I'm scared of looking stupid, I will avoid the task, and avoid the what I think is going to be the ridicule of attempting the task and failing. Now in the current situation with coronavirus, we may have these kinds of iMessages. We may have iMessages as well that do relate particularly to what's going on at the moment. So we may have things like, I'm upset that everything looks different. You know, I need familiarity. I need to know what's going on in my environment, and things look different and people look different. I want to play tag with my friends. A behaviour I've heard about quite recently is a child who really struggled to maintain the social distancing, particularly when they were outside, less so in the classroom, but when they were outside. So this might be an I message behind that kind of behaviour. I want to play tag with my friends, and maybe I don't understand why I'm not able to. I'm worried about grandma, preoccupations, things that are going on elsewhere that actually take their mind away from a task that's given in school. You know, I'm worried about what has happened to grandma. I'm worried about what might happen to grandma. And I don't understand the new rules. So lots of new rules, a novel and unusual situation that if they're returning to school, that they find when they get there. So this little snippet of training that I'm doing with this video today is not designed specifically for coronavirus, but there are, in this situation, but there are particular considerations with the current situation that might be pertinent to coming to your best understanding of what's going on for the child. So I'm just going to backtrack with these slides a second. So what I find either when I'm using this approach in schools, in the work that we do, or when I'm doing this kind of exercise as part of training, is I believe there's quite a shift from operating at this with this kind of a focus. What's the behaviour and how can we stop the behaviour that we don't want, to this focus, which is about understanding what's going on for the child and doing our best to identify what unmet needs there may be. And then I think if you've got a child who's saying these kind of things, either verbally or through their behaviour, then the onus becomes upon us as the adult to think, okay, well, how can I support a child who's scared of looking stupid? How can I support a child who's worried about their grandma or other family member who's maybe become ill? How can I support a child who doesn't understand the new rules that we're trying to keep to in school? About a child who's bored with the way that a task is presented. That's the onus is there on me as the adult to try and make this task or the content stimulating and relevant to the child. So I think when you have a focus on the behaviours, it can begin to feel it can feel quite negative. And of course, I'm not trying to skirt around the fact that the behaviours that may be challenging can be very challenging and can raise lots of emotions in us as the adults when we're finding it difficult to move forward. But I guess the point here is that if we look at it from the child's point of view and try to identify what's going on for them, then we tend to feel that maybe there's actually more that we can do about it, and we can identify things we can do in their environment or skills that we can help them to develop that might help them to move forward, and will move forward in a more positive way than simply us trying to impose sanctions or that kind of an approach to try to eliminate the negative behaviour. So those are messages and I statements are, I think, kind of more user-friendly ways of describing functions of behaviour. Nevertheless, these are the 5 broad categories of functions of behaviour. As you can see, first one about social interaction, whether that's with adults or with other children. Quite often something that we say as adults is, or we use the phrase attention seeking, or they're attention seeking. And we rephrase that a little bit here by saying it's about initiating social interaction. Somebody once said to me, if you talk about with the phrase attention seeking, it can sound a little bit judgmental. If you talk about the phrase attention needing, then it puts a different slant on it, and it puts it in the realm of these unmet needs that I was just talking about. Avoidance could be avoidance of anything, like the example I gave, avoidance of a task that's been set, but it could be avoidance of anything. Social interaction with others, avoidance of particular people, particular circumstances, noisy environments, avoidance of anything that you could think of. There's one that's about control and making choices. And maybe, you can consider that might be particularly pertinent at the moment, where control is kind of gone out of the window, but for us as adults, but also for children who aren't allowed to do lots of the things that they would ordinarily be allowed to do. So maybe some of the behaviour that we see might be around just trying to claw back some of that control in some ways and to make choices. Expressing emotion and the kind of flip side of that being reducing stress is one that might be evident quite often. So the behaviour is about expressing frustration, anxiety, anger, sadness, those worries that I spoke about in current times about loved ones. So expressing emotion, and in the expression of the emotion, very often a reduction in stress. A bit like, releasing a kind of a valve that lets out all the pressure. And finally, stimulation, and this could work in kind of different directions and at different levels. So the behaviour that we see might be around increasing the level of stimulation. So the child, again in the previous example, refusal to do the task set and the iMessage, "I'm bored." The task just wasn't stimulating to them, whereas running around and around the classroom was much more stimulating. So there may be an element of increasing stimulation for the child. It may be around reducing stimulation. So something we might see is a child who, for example, goes off under a table and covers their ears when it's about to be a transition. The children getting ready to go out for lunch. So what they're trying to do is reduce that stimulation, trying to reduce the noise, which presumably is anxiety provoking for them. So the behaviour could be about raising the level of stimulation that they're experiencing, or reducing that level of stimulation. Okay, so we've come to our best understanding of what's going on for the child, what underlies their behaviour, what the function or functions may be below their behaviour. Of course, we want to move forwards and develop strategies. Now, as I said earlier, that's not the focus for this training, but I will highlight the sorts of considerations that you have when you're moving forwards from the understanding of the behaviour to developing strategies. And the key thing is that there's a really strong link there. The strategies you develop entirely rely upon the understanding that you came to as to what was going on for them. So, for example, if a child's behaviour, the understanding we've come to is that we think it's about demonstrating stress that's created in noisy environments, then we might have an idea of the sorts of things we're going to need to be doing to help them with that, and not to rely on those negative behaviours. So we have a bunch of strategies that we call proactive, things that we do all the time to try to increase the frequency of positive behaviours and reduce the frequency of the negative behaviours. So we have environmental strategies, things we can do around the child. For example, removing those trigger points for a child who finds noisy, busy environment stressful. So maybe we don't require them to be part of the whole class as the whole class gets ready for lunch. We could enable them to go ahead of time or to wait a little behind. We can do all sorts of things. We're in control of many aspects of the environment as the adults. We're not in control of everything, but we're in control of a lot of things that we can change. So we need to consider what we can change in the environment that may make the environment a better fit to this child's needs. Now, if all we do is environmental strategies, then we'll have to keep doing those environmental strategies forever and ever, unless we have skill development running alongside. So we actually help the child to become better equipped to deal with some things that they currently find very difficult. So we won't forever after have to remove the trigger points for the child, because they'll be better able either to identify those and use strategies to cope, or just be able to manage those situations much better by developing new skills. Rewards are there as well, because it moving towards a less comfortable position, you know, moving towards new skills, and that can be quite a slow burn kind of improvement, learning new skills and being able to implement them. So the rewards are clearly there as a motivator for the child to, if you like, leave behind what's been working for them so far and actually move towards a different way of doing things. Then we have reactive strategies alongside the proactive. So these are where we are responding to difficulties. We have to be realistic and think, well, we're unlikely with even the best range of proactive strategies to eliminate the difficult behaviour overnight. And so we do need a part of the plan which is around responding to difficulties. Now that we have two main sorts of plan that we use within the Educational Psychology Service. One is a multi-element plan, which you may well have come across, and you may recognise these titles from that plan. Another plan that we've used more recently, but still it's been established for quite some time now, is the Emotional Wellbeing Support Framework. And that is that both of those different types of plans still rest on the functional assessment, our best understanding of what's going on for the child. But the Emotional Wellbeing Support Framework tends to focus on these sorts of questions a little bit more than the multi-element plan does, although of course you could still use these questions if you're developing a multi-element plan. So what's working well? What does the child succeed at? What do they enjoy? What really switches them on and excites them? So what's working well? What could we do more of? You know, how can we expand the what's working well so that it takes up more of the time? And of course, not just what can we do more of that's existing already, but what new ideas do we have for things that could be helpful given our best understanding of the child? And I've already emphasised that point. It's any strategies we develop have to be related to our understanding of the child through the functional assessment. Okay, thank you for watching today and for listening, and I hope that's been helpful.